king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 209 Liquidation and 3 years of tax exemption. It was easy to take the two cities, but it was not so easy to take the countryside. Because the two cities belonged to the earl. However, there were many small lords in the countryside, such as baronies, knights or knights' manors. Although the Sexna family had fallen, the barons, knights, and lords did not surrender immediately. They stayed in their castles and manors, demanding that Marin maintain their original status and territory, otherwise they would not surrender. But Marin was unwilling to accept their surrender. Why? Because these people had divided up all the land. Where could he find land to distribute in the future? Although there is still a lot of wasteland in East Frisia that needs to be reclaimed, the small nobles who were previously loyal to the Sexner family have occupied a lot of good land. Especially in the agriculturally developed Lair County, a lot of fertile land has been divided up by the Sexner family and other small nobles. You know, the large agricultural county of Lyle, according to the information of former Palace Prime Minister Geoffrey, has 50,000 ugrams of arable land, which is a full 100,000 acres, 600,000 mu. However, all of this arable land was controlled by the Sexner family and the lower-level nobles who were loyal to them. You know, in the Wadden Islands, Marin tried his best and used all resources, but he only cultivated more than 10,000 ugrams. In Lyle County alone, there were 50,000 ugrams of land, and most of it was very fertile. Not only that, Geoffrey also told Marin a very important piece of information. Lyle County was once the territory of the Uckner family, who rebelled against the Bullock family. It was precisely because of the financially strong agricultural county like Lyle County that the Uckner family had the confidence and strength to rebel. Even now, many small nobles in Lyle County were followers of the Uckner family in the past, and now they are also followers of the Sexner family. Therefore, the small nobles in Lyle County, more or less, all had grudges against the Bullock family, which gave Marin enough excuses to annex their territory. Of course, Geoffrey and several officials who surrendered to Marin a long time ago also had some land in Lyle County, which Marin would not move. Since he accepted their surrender, he would not deprive them of their land. For the sake of the 50,000 ugrams of fertile land, Marin made up his mind and decided to use the excuse of settling old grudges to investigate the small nobles in Lyle County and take the opportunity to deprive them of their land. Therefore, Marin directly sent 2,000 soldiers and horses to the countryside of Lyle County to attack the rebellious nobles. At the same time, Marin also sent 100 cavalrymen to intercept the nobles who wanted to escape, so that they would not become Marin's opponents after running away. As for the countryside in Auric and other areas, Marin was not so coveted by those lands. However, the total arable land in the other areas was not less than that in Lyle County, but it was relatively poor. Marin's attitude towards other places was different, especially towards Auric County, because Auric County was once the base of the Bullock family. According to the report sent back by Schwartz, many local people were still loyal to the Bullock family. For Auric County, Marin's policy was to strike at the diehards of the Sexner family and confiscate their property and land. The targets were mainly the new nobles who were canonized by the Uckner and Sexner families after the fall of the Block family. Marin did not recognize any of these canonizations. As for some minor nobles who originally served the Brock family but later defected to the Sexna family, Marin did not touch their land and continued to employ them, but he was also on guard against them. However, there is another type of people in Auric County. They were once nobles who were loyal to the Block family. But after the Uckner family successfully rebelled, they were deprived of their noble status and became commoners because of their loyalty to the Block family. And these families, because they were once noble families, all have a knowledge inheritance. After Schwartz's inquiry, he found out that there were 19 such families in Auric. After hearing this, Marin immediately signed the first Earl's order, granting the title of knight to the heads of these 19 families. In addition, he was going to select talents from the educated children of these 19 families and train them as reserve officials. If they were talented, they would be directly appointed as officials. Marin is so short of talent now, so he was overjoyed to learn about the existence of these 19 families. 19 families, there must be dozens of scholars. Marin's attitude towards other regions was also very clear. After the fall of the Brock family, the newly enthroned nobles of the Uckna and Sexna families would be abolished and their property and land would be deprived. As for the nobles who had existed before, if they surrendered voluntarily, they would temporarily retain their noble status. If they did not surrender, they would be directly eliminated, and their property and land would be confiscated. Because of Marin's liquidation policy, many small country nobles rose up in rebellion, and even many serfs followed suit. For a time, East Frisia was in turmoil. But Marin was not worried. East Frisia had a total population of only 60,000. If all the able-bodied men were gathered together and given a good commander, it would be difficult to deal with them. But now, these country nobles were fighting on their own, and the total strength of each family generally did not exceed 100, so they were easy to deal with. Marin first sent people to deal with the large number of rebels, then recruited the remaining troops of these rebels, and then took these surrendered troops to deal with the others. In fact, the resistance in other counties was not too fierce. Because those who resisted Marin to the end were just a group of small nobles newly enthroned by the Ukna and Sexna families. There were only about 20 of them in total, and they were easy to deal with. But it was different in Lier County. All the petty nobles here were to be dealt with. Therefore, the entire Lier County became a battlefield for conquest. More than 70 local nobles formed an alliance to fight against Marin. They gathered more than 2,000 people to fight against Marin's army. The leaders were a dozen local knights. However, these ragtag armies were really vulnerable. Marin sent out Frundsberg's third phalanx, and after a volley of gunfire, they knocked down a dozen knights leading the opposing army, and the morale of the opposing army immediately collapsed. Then, the army charged, and the opposing army collapsed. Next, it was time to capture prisoners. Then, all the land deeds in Lisle County fell into Marin's hands. However, after suppressing so many small nobles at once, people in the East Frisian counties were in a state of panic. Many people were worried that the newly appointed Count Marin would turn his knife against them next time. For this reason, Marin decided to appease the people to avoid social instability. So, on November 11, the legendary Singles Day, Marin signed the Second Earl's order. Starting next year, the entire county of East Frisia will be tax-free for 3 years. That is to say, in the next 3 years, the landowners, merchants, fishermen, citizens, etc. of East Frisia will not need to pay any taxes to the Count. Of course, Marin specifically pointed out that the pound tax on import and export trade must still be paid. In addition, the tithe of the church is not under Marin's jurisdiction. At the same time, in this document, Marin also announced that the liquidation was over and no further investigation would be carried out. In fact, this liquidation allowed Marin to obtain a total of 70,000 ugrams of farmland, which was a huge harvest. What else can I say? Although it brought a lot of chaos, Marin's soldiers were well trained and crushed the ragtag army composed of small country nobles. So, all this was not a big problem. Now, Marin's order, announcing a 3-year tax exemption and a suspension of liquidation, finally calmed the people's hearts in the country. Even if there are still people who want to rebel, they can't make any waves. Because those powerful nobles have basically been purged by Marin. There are even 2 barons who have no intention of confronting Marin, but because they are too powerful and occupy too much land, they were also cleaned up by Marin with excuses. In East Frisia, Marin does not need powerful little lords, because that would weaken his power. As for the 3-year tax exemption in East Frisia, it was actually not a big deal. Because Marin checked the data and found that the tax revenue of the entire East Frisia was only more than 50,000 gold coins per year. Among them, more than 10,000 gold coins were import and export taxes obtained by Emdenport. In other words, other domestic taxes were only 40,000 gold coins per year. Marin really didn't care about such a small amount of money. Because the income from selling salt in Yenching was several times more than this amount of tax in a year. Therefore, these taxes were not very important. Even if they were exempted from tax for 3 years, they would only lose 120,000 gold coins. However, it was worth it if it could bring peace to the whole country. Sure enough, after the order was issued, under Marin's hard work, the society of East Frisia was basically stabilized. In order to achieve the effect, Marin spent money to hire many local people with loud voices to go to each village to loudly publicize the content of the order and let everyone know the fact of tax exemption for 3 years. This kind of overwhelming propaganda has a very good effect. After hearing about the 3-year tax exemption and the suspension of liquidation, the residents really felt relieved. To paraphrase a sentence from the China News Network, the people have taken a reassurance pill. Next, Auxiliary Bishop Taylor personally went to several cities' cathedrals to preach and promote the event, seizing the opportunity of 3 years of tax exemption and describing Marin as a very wise lord, who was simply the savior of the people. Chapter 210, Eliminating the Roots. The liquidation operation brought huge benefits to Marin, but also brought many captives. In particular, many of the captives were big shots. For example, the 3 brothers of Edisad I, and several barons. As for knights and knights, there were even more. According to statistics, a total of 1 earl, Edisad I, 2 princes, 2 younger brothers of Edisad I, 5 barons, 22 knights, 65 knights, and their families were captured during this liquidation. In total, there were thousands of noble captives and their families. Marin was somewhat shocked. In such a small country like East Frisia, with a total population of only over 60,000, there were so many nobles and their families. You know, Marin only captured about 2/3 of the nobles in the entire territory of East Frisia, and the other 1/3 had already surrendered, so he didn't touch them. And these thousands of people are only the main members of the noble families. As for the butlers and attendants who serve the nobles, they are not counted yet. Marin called his men together to discuss how to deal with these captured nobles. Old Hoffman and others who were far away in Mark County also rushed to Emden to participate in the discussion after receiving Marin's message. Sir, I advocate the execution of all adult males and spare the others. These nobles cannot agree with you from the bottom of their hearts. So, it is better to kill the men and spare the old, young, women and children. Schwartz spoke first. When the meeting officially started, Schwartz also called him sir. My lord, I think that all males should be killed, including all little boys. Because even those little boys will grow up. Once they grow up, they will become your mortal enemies because of the hatred of their fathers. In order to prevent this situation from happening, you should be ruthless and kill all male members. Kohler expressed his opinion. I object. We are knights, knights with chivalry. Do you remember the 8 virtues of chivalry, said Franzberg. Humility, honor, sacrifice, bravery, mercy, honesty, justice, soul. I have no objection to the execution of Edzard I and his brothers. If they are alive, they are indeed a threat to adults. But for the others, let's kill fewer of them. If we raise our butcher knives against those children, where will the knight's mercy be? After Franzberg finished speaking, the knights present were silent. Even old Hoffman and Adler, who were participating in the discussion, did not speak after hearing Franzberg's words. At this time, Denberg Mayor Heidel, who came from Denberg, adjusted his glasses and said, Mr. Franzberg, I admire the chivalry you mentioned. But have you ever thought about the fact that you have deprived these former nobles of their land and titles? This is a hatred that is difficult to resolve. Whether you kill them or not, they will hate you. If they have the chance, they will definitely not give up on killing you. This. Franzberg was a little speechless. Indeed, from the moment Marin deprived those people of their titles and lands, the two sides had been incompatible. It was indeed unwise to keep the enemy. If the enemy was his own, he wouldn't mind letting him go and showing his chivalry. But if the enemy was his boss, Marin, he couldn't say anything. I know that you knights cannot get over the hurdle of mercy in your hearts, but Kohler and Hader are not knights and do not need any mercy. In our hearts, the safety of the adults is the most important. If you can't get over that hurdle, then let Hader and I be the executioners. Kohler is a tax collector, but he is a civil servant, so there is naturally no need to talk about chivalry. What do you want to do? Schwartz hesitated and asked. Isn't Hader a law student? He is also a top student in the law department of the University of Cologne. Let him be the judge and sentence these people guilty. Then, I will arrange for the executioners to send these people to death. No, Kohler, don't arrange an axeman or an executioner. I decided to use someone else. Then, Marin, who had been listening, spoke. Someone else? Everyone was puzzled. Yes, those who come to me. Ah. Your Excellency, what do you mean? Since they have surrendered to me, in order to cut off their retreat, I decided to let those nobles who surrendered to me act as executioners to kill Edzard I and those nobles who rebelled against me. This move is called a pledge of allegiance in China. Some people who want to join the Black State often have to commit a crime or kill a person before they are accepted. Once they do this, it is equivalent to having a case on their backs. It will be extremely difficult to turn back and be a good person. By the same token, if these nobles who surrendered to him personally killed Edzard I and his followers, then in the future, if someone used the banner of the Sexna family to oppose Marin, these people would certainly not respond. Because it was they who personally killed Edzard I and his loyal followers. This is like Wu Sangue strangling the Yomli emperor of the southern Ming dynasty to death with a bow. When he later rebelled against the Qing dynasty, none of the old and young people of the Ming dynasty believed him, let alone supported him, and they even tried to sabotage him, which ultimately led to Wu Sangue's defeat. As long as these surrendered nobles have their hands stained with the blood of Edzard I and his men, there is no way back. Hearing Marin's vicious plan, everyone present shuddered. It was too vicious. In fact, these methods were just ordinary tricks that Marin had seen in TV dramas and novels in his previous life. But in the European Middle Ages, which lacked conspiracy and intrigue, they were indeed too sinister. Soon, Marin appointed Hader as the chief judge of the East Frisian county and set up a temporary court to try nobles such as Edzard I. Hader was a law major. He did not start the verdict directly, but first ruled that the rebellion in 1435 was an unforgivable act of treason. Then, he sentenced all the nobles who participated in the rebellion to be deprived of their noble status. Of course, Hayder was very smart. Because the verdict was announced in public, those nobles had actually been knocked unconscious by the skilled Khan. Then, when the verdict was announced in court, those nobles were driven by soldiers. They looked like they were standing, but they were actually being driven. Because they were unconscious, their heads were naturally lowered. And people in this era had long hair. When their heads were lowered, the long hair would cover their faces, making it impossible to see that their eyes were closed. It looked like they were bowing their heads to confess their guilt. So, when Hayder sentenced them to be stripped of their noble status, no one defended themselves, nor were they able to defend themselves, because they were all unconscious. Now that they have become civilians, it will be easier to pronounce a sentence. According to the tradition of this era, few people would sentence nobles to death. However, Hayder was very smart. He first deprived them of their noble status and demoted them to commoners, and then sentenced them to death. That would not be a problem. The next day, still in the square in front of Emden Palace, Hayder publicly sentenced these people to death. This caused a commotion among the onlookers. Because the remaining half of the citizens of Emden were still very resistant to the death sentence of Edisard I. However, unlike the other half who participated in the resistance, this half of the citizens were timid and did not have the courage to fight to the death. Although the crowd was in turmoil, under the close surveillance of Marin's fully armed soldiers, no major chaos occurred. Then, Geoffrey, Pace and a large group of nobles who surrendered to Marin were escorted by soldiers to the square. Under the coercion of the soldiers and the crowd, Geoffrey and others raised their daggers with trembling hands and stabbed at the chests of Edisad I and others. Screams were heard one after another. After being stabbed in the chest, these nobles who were originally knocked unconscious finally woke up from the pain. However, what made them despair was that they saw that their former colleagues had stabbed the knife into their hearts. The dying cries of hundreds of nobles resounded throughout the square. The onlookers, whether they were soldiers or civilians, were all terrified. The nobles who were responsible for the knife-wielding and who had surrendered to Marin also looked ashen, as they understood that from now on, they could only follow Marin to the end. Because, from the moment they took action, they had no way out. There was one noble who refused to use the knife, but he was immediately tied up and killed along with the other nobles who were sentenced. Then, Geoffrey and the others became completely obedient and honestly helped kill people. On the night after these nobles were killed, Kohler led his men into the prison where the nobles' families were held. Take all those little boys away. The soldiers did as they were told, and then, amidst the cries and howls, little boys from noble families were pulled out one by one, nearly 200 in total. The next day, no one saw these little boys again, as if they had never appeared in the world. On the third day, the remaining women, the young ones, were taken to the military camp by Kohler to serve as camp prostitutes, while the old ones were dragged to be laundry women. The little girls were gathered together and raised first, and then arranged later. On the evening of the third day, Frundsberg found Kohler at the gate of the palace and asked angrily, "Is this your idea or yours?" Kohler was silent for a while, then said slowly, "That's what I meant. The young master is a lord and is merciful. And the executioner is me. And it can only be me." After almost growling the last sentence, Kohler left without looking back. Frundsberg and Kohler didn't know that Marin was standing behind the door while they were talking. Seeing Kohler's heavy steps when he left, Marin's heart was also heavy. Because, those decisions were made by him. Maybe I should compensate Kohler, Marin said to himself. Looking at Frundsberg who left angrily, Marin frowned, but said nothing, and turned away. Chapter 211, Moving the Capital, Ascending the Throne, and Deception. After the East Frisian state was basically stabilized, Marin began to hold the coronation ceremony and reward meritorious soldiers. However, these days, his soldiers, including the old Hoffman couple and the Adler couple, have reported a situation, that is, the citizens of Emden look at them with unfriendly eyes. In fact, this was all the fault of Auxiliary Bishop Taylor. Taylor deceived these citizens to worship and admire Edzard I. Marin killed Edzard I, so the local citizens naturally would not treat Marin and his subordinates well. This was still considered good. In the previous siege, even half of the families participated in the confrontation with Marin's army. Although Bishop Taylor also began to help Marin fool the people according to Marin's wishes, he had helped Edzard I fool people for many years, and the views of many citizens were deeply rooted and difficult to change for a while. Moreover, the previous fall of Emden also showed that the seaside port of Emden, although suitable for developing trade and economy, was insufficient in terms of security. As the city of Auric became stable, local noble representatives and the impoverished noble families who had followed the Block family in the past also petitioned Marin to move the capital back to Auric, and to guarantee that the entire city of Auric would be in solidarity with Marin, the legitimate heir of the Block family, and that all the people of the city would swear allegiance to Marin in the name of God. There are two big cities in the county of East Frisia. The residents of one city are hostile to him, while the residents of the other city are eagerly looking forward to his visit. Naturally, Marin's heart leans towards Auric. Moreover, after discussion, the officers unanimously agreed that setting up the capital in a port by the river or the sea was too unsafe and would easily expose the country to the enemy's attack. Finally, Marin decided to move the capital to Auric. Then, he strengthened the walls of Auric, set up multiple forts and built multiple beacon towers around Auric. In this way, even if there were enemies attacking in the future, he could respond quickly, unlike the unfortunate I, who was inexplicably defeated. In order to prevent the enemy from using tunnel warfare against Auric, Marin planned to dig a deep moat around Auric. If the enemy wanted to dig a tunnel, he would first ask the moat if it agreed. However, although the capital was moved to Auric, Emden was a well-located port and could not be abandoned. In Marin's eyes, Auric was equivalent to the northern part of China in the future, while Emden should be similar to Shanghai as an economic center. However, East Frisia is small in area, and Auric is only about 20 kilometers away from Emden. Therefore, Auric's geographical location is not remote at all, and it is still a coastal area. However, because it is far from the sea, it also has a buffer zone. Moreover, Auric is located in the center of East Frisia. From the perspective of national defense and security, no matter which border area is invaded, if bunkers and beacon towers are set up in advance, there will always be a chance to issue an early warning. Considering that there are many princes in Germany, who knows when war will break out? Therefore, it is absolutely right to move the capital from Emden in the border area to Auric in the center. When Marin announced his decision, almost no one objected and it passed smoothly. Lady Mary even excitedly talked about the royal palace of Auric. In fact, Lady Mary had never been to Auric, but since she was a child, her father, who had escaped from the rebellion, always loved to tell her about his childhood life in the Auric palace. This story lasted for more than 10 years until Lady Mary's father was killed by an assassin. However, after more than a decade of beautiful descriptions, Lady Mary longed for the royal palace of Auric, and always felt that it was the most beautiful place in the world. However, when Lady Mary followed Marin's huge migration team to Auric, she was full of disappointment. Because the palace in Auric was not very beautiful. It was similar to the palace of the Sexner family in Emden, more like a castle than a palace. Because one of the important purposes of building this palace was to ensure safety, who said that the Middle Ages were full of wars. However, Marin was not disappointed. Because he decided to expand the palace in the future. He bought the residents' land around the castle and expanded the palace 3 or 4 times. It was not comparable to the palaces in the east that were tens or even hundreds of hectares, nor to the Buckingham Palace with a face value of 180,000 square meters, but at least it should be comparable to the British royal family's villa, Windsor Castle. You know, Windsor Castle is 45,000 square meters. However, the palace in Auric, including the yard, is no more than 5,000 square meters. Therefore, Marin decided to expand the castle 9 times, to the same size as Windsor Castle. Of course, this is not urgent. The most urgent thing now is the coronation ceremony and the reward for the meritorious officials. On November 18, 1498, a day that seemed auspicious to Marin, Marin held a grand coronation ceremony in the square in front of the Auric Palace. The 70-year-old Bishop Rich, tremblingly, put the earl's crown on Marin's head under the gaze of everyone. In fact, Marin wanted to learn from Napoleon and take the crown from old Richie and put it on himself. However, considering that Napoleon could beat the whole of Europe, Marin could only be beaten. So, Marin still waited obediently for old Richie to put the crown on his head. After old Rich put the crown on Marin, blessed Marin, and announced that Marin was the only legitimate Earl of East Frisia, he was helped down. Because old Rich was in poor health, it was already very good that he could hold on for so long. Wearing a crown and holding a real golden scepter, Marin felt like he was being given an aura of awesomeness and immediately started shaking. He stood up with great vigor, waved the heavy golden scepter in his hand, and began to give a speech to everyone present. "This is God's will," Marin said arrogantly. "God does not allow a rebel to murder his master and still get away with it. So, at the most critical moment of the Bullock family, God allowed my grandfather to escape, and with God's blessing, an heir like my mother was born. Although my mother is not a male heir, her son is the legitimate male heir of East Frisia. Here, I want to thank my eldest brother Adler, who was very gentlemanly in giving up the throne to me. At the same time, I also thanked the 6,000 soldiers under my command. It was God's blessing that brought them to my side. It was also God's blessing that they fought bloody battles for me, defeated the descendants of the rebels, and took back the crown that the bloodline of the Bullock family deserved. The king's power is granted by God, and God is omnipotent. Marin raised the golden scepter and shouted. Everyone present was a Catholic, so they naturally followed suit and shouted, "The king's power is granted by God, and God can do everything. The king's power is granted by God, and God can do everything. The king's power is granted by God, and God can do everything. The king's power is granted by God, and God can do everything. God used my hand to execute the descendants of those rebels who were bewitched by the devil. They deserved to die. Because they sold their souls to the devil and destroyed the laws and order set by God. Then, the devil will eventually be defeated by the angels. And those rebels who sold their souls to the devil, and their descendants, will eventually be thrown into hell. I am Marin von Hoffmann. Before I was 16, I was still an ignorant boy. At the beginning, my father drove me out of the house according to the rules of the German region, and only gave me half a set of plate armor, a lance, and 10 gold coins for travel expenses. But, I was useless back then. I couldn't beat my elder brother in fighting. I was also average in intelligence. Because I trusted a liar, I was cheated out of 10 gold coins. I couldn't afford to stay in an inn, so I had to sleep in a haystack in the wilderness. I shivered in the cold night and was almost starved to death. In the end, I managed to save my life by snatching a few green grasses from my warhorse. But even in such a difficult situation, I never thought of robbing and killing people like those fallen wandering knights. Because I am a knight and should not attack innocent people. I lay in the dirty and messy haystack, shivering, and with the last bit of consciousness in my dying body, I prayed devoutly to God, praying that God would save me, a lost child. Everyone around was shocked. They really didn't expect that Marin, who was so high-spirited now, had such a tragic past. Of course, most of this was true. It was just that Marin didn't reveal the most important identity of a time traveler, and it was also slightly fictional. And Mrs. Mary, who had never heard Marin talk about this tragic story before, was so distressed that she could only shed tears. Even a man like old Hoffmann had red eyes after hearing it. I am dying, but God have mercy on me. I am the heir of the Bullock family. I should not die of starvation so miserably. So, God sent an ascetic monk and great sage named Einstein to come to me when I was about to starve to death. When the great sage saw me, he was surprised. He told me that I was a person with noble blood and should not die in such a cowardly way. So he saved me and gave me a piece of life-saving black bread. Then, he took me as his disciple and taught me knowledge for a month. At that time, I was very surprised. In the past, I was not very smart and my learning ability was very slow. However, the great sage only taught me for a month, but I felt like I had learned for 10 years. I remembered many things as soon as I learned them. This was completely different from my previous situation. I used to learn things very slowly. Regarding this, my family can swear in the name of God that what I said is true. At this time, the old Hoffmann couple and Adler on the viewing platform nodded desperately, because what Marin said was absolutely correct. Moreover, they dared to swear on the Bible that they did not lie. Just like that, after a month of study, I suddenly became smarter, as if I was enveloped by the light of wisdom. In my opinion, there is only one possibility for such a miracle, that is, God's gift. Otherwise, there is no other explanation more reasonable than this one. Because I became smarter, or maybe I was blessed by God. So, after I ran to Vienna, I easily won the appreciation of His Majesty the Emperor. From a mere wandering knight, I was appointed as the acting commander of the square. The following story may have been heard by many people. I led my troops to participate in the Italian War. On that day, it seemed as if God was guiding me. I was ordered to lead my troops to support the Italians. But, in a daze, I seemed to be guided by God. Someone seemed to tell me that on the night of July 6, 1494, the French would retreat from a certain road. So, according to God's guidance, I set an ambush there, severely damaged the French army, and almost captured the King of France. But maybe God thought I shouldn't be so lucky to catch the King of France. So, the King of France finally ran away. But many French knights fell into my hands. So, I became a baron. Marin talked a lot, blah blah blah. However, in this era, Marin's experience is very legendary, countless times more exciting than novels. Therefore, everyone present listened to Marin's bragging in silence, and everyone was very interested. Even the old subordinates who participated in the famous ambush with Marin listened with great interest. Of course, 8 out of 10 of what Marin said was true, and only 2 out of 10 was fake. Therefore, no one present could hear any problem. But Marin's experience was too miraculous and incredible. Therefore, everyone present unanimously agreed that this was indeed God's blessing. Otherwise, it would be impossible for so many miracles to happen to the same person. Everyone present took note of Marin's story and spread it later. Such a bizarre experience, as if blessed by God, was hard to understand no matter who it was. In the end, they could only attribute it to God's favor. After this great deception, everyone present began to believe that Marin was the Count of East Frisia chosen by God.